Now, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Dublin is Bobby McDonough, a former Irish ambassador to the EU, Italy and the UK. Daniel Levy's in London. He's the president of the US Middle East Project and a former Israeli negotiator. And in Tel Aviv, Dan Perry, the publisher of Ask Questions Later on Substack and a former editor for the Associated Press for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. A warm welcome to you all. Let's go to Dan Perry. Dan, is this unpopularity all down to one man?
It's much about one man, yes. I think Israel faces a major fork in the road, not just in Europe's attitude towards it and the world's attitude, but its entire reality. And down one road goes the Netanyahu coalition, extreme right, ultra-religious, and at loggerheads with the region and the world, continuing. And down the other path goes a major course correction, which I think would happen and would impact how the world deals with Israel. Now, look, some of the opposition to Israel is visceral and permanent, but I think what is pushing things in a direction of an anti-Israel dynamic is indeed the actions that the Netanyahu government has taken, especially in the past couple of years, but also its whole zeitgeist. Netanyahu is part of this global cabal of elected autocrats. One of them was just ousted in Hungary. And that changes everything about how Europe itself views Hungary. I think something similar will happen in Israel if Netanyahu is removed, yeah.
Daniel, do you agree with that? Do you agree that it's all down to Netanyahu?
Well, it's a nice story that people can tell themselves, and there's an element to the in-your-face radicalism of the current government. But pause and look for a moment at what the so-called opposition, at least on the Zionist benches, this doesn't include the parties representing the Palestinian Arab community, who have small pockets of support among Israeli Jews. But pause and look for a moment among what that Zionist opposition is saying. None of them have opposed the war in Gaza. None of them have opposed what's being done in Lebanon. None of them have opposed pulling America into this war against Iran. But the malaise may run a lot deeper than what was just described. This is fundamentally about, can the Zionist project coexist with the region, with Palestinians in peace? And actual existing Zionism as practiced by the state of Israel is telling us time and time again that an ethno-supremacist state cannot do that.
Dan, did you want to jump in there before I move to Bobby?
I did. Daniel's right that the issue is hugely complex, and it won't be resolved in a total way, in an immediate way, by Netanyahu's ouster. I don't want to oversimplify, but you misrepresent the Israeli opposition, which is in a bind because they're trying to maximize the vote and so appeal to right-wing voters. I'm sure you're not naive and you understand that. But the opposition in Israel, were it to come to power, would absolutely end the coddling of extreme terrorist settlers, basically, in the West Bank, would seek some sort of partition of the Holy Land, essentially, dividing it between Israelis and Palestinians in some way that they think they can manage. It might not satisfy all the demands of the Palestinians, but they're going to try for sure. And whereas, of course, most Israelis support the eradication of Hezbollah and Hamas and the Iranian regime, something I think the Europeans support as well, just not Israel's methods. Once they would go about it very, very differently.
Daniel, go ahead.
Literally one quick comment. I think we take an easy route when we say the problem is radical settlers. The settler phenomenon does not exist without the state, without the military, without the tax subsidies, without everything that every government of any hue has provided. And secondly, I agree with Dan, it would look different. I think the alternatives are genocide or apartheid. Apartheid is what the opposition offers, a partition which is Bantustans. I simply am not a fan of either apartheid or genocide.
Bobby,
I think it's
there's a lot of
conflict.
Sorry. I want to come to Bobby first because I want to get the European angle on this. I mean, there's a lot of division within Europe when it's come to the issue of Israel. But broadly speaking, Israel is an important trading partner. It's the biggest trading partner, and it sees itself as being the democracy that's in the Middle East and almost part European. So there's a natural affinity there. Is that damaging to the European Union?
I think it's important, Imran, to understand the decision-making procedures of the European Union. They may sound a little bit boring, but they're very important. Europe has to decide things either by unanimity, in which case all member states have to agree, or by qualified majority, in which most of them have to agree. And so it isn't the case, as I think you said earlier, that there was a split growing amongst the EU member states. The starting point is that there are 27 individual countries with different histories and different perspectives. And it's very, very difficult to come together. So on the various actions that could be taken against Israel, some require unanimity, such as suspending in full the association agreement. Others are possible by qualified majority, like suspending the trade aspects of the agreement, or by putting tariffs on products from the occupied territories. So it's not as though there is a monolithic European Union sitting in an office in Brussels that's betraying its values. There are 27 independent countries, and of course Germany in particular has its own history. So it's very, very difficult for them to come together. But I think that there's now a reasonable prospect with the next meeting of ministers on the 11th of May, and with Italy shifting its attitudes somewhat, and Hungary and perhaps others, that some sort of action will be taken. I don't believe that there will be unanimity.
Dan, there's a conversation that is happening here that is talking about Israel's relationship with Europe, Israel's relationship with its closest ally, America, and that seems to be shifting also probably slightly, in a way that is perhaps not palatable, but it's happening. But my question to you is this a conversation that's happening in Israel? Are Israelis worried about the shift, or do they think their relationships with Europe and America are solid?
The smart ones are, but I think the country at large isn't quite as worried as it should be about the potential demise of its relationship with Europe, which accounts for over a third of its exports. And if you throw in the UK, it approaches half of its exports. It would be disastrous for Israel. They know there's a problem, but as Daniel said, Israel has made a bet that politics in the West might go a certain direction. And I'm not sure that bet is wrong. It's a vastly different Europe if, let's say, the national rally wins in France, or whether in the UK, where Daniel resides, the government is headed by Nigel Farage, or Starmer, or the Green Party even. You don't know what's going to happen in the UK. I would also, however, distinguish between the Israeli government, which is not pursuing Israel's interests, I fear, and Israeli people at large that are divided, as are the Europeans, and as are the Americans. America is very different if Rubio wins, or if Trump had a third term. That's one America. A normal Republican is another America, and the American left coming to power is vastly different and would quickly turn on Israel as well. And I think a lot of the confusion that Europeans feel about what to do with their anger over the methods and the essence of the Netanyahu coalition is because they themselves don't quite know what to do about their own values. Do their values really align with acquiescence to and cooperation with the criminal regime in Iran? They don't like the war, which they weren't consulted about. Of course they don't. And they don't like the short-term inconvenience. But do they like the Iranian regime massacring tens of thousands of protests? They would like democracy, sure. But do they really apply democratic principles in all their association agreements? Israel has an association agreement, but so does Lebanon, that systematically denies the Palestinians basic rights.
Dan, are you suggesting that because Israel and other states, Iran and Lebanon, don't have perhaps robust democratic institutions, that Europe can get away with it? Europe can get away with it because they don't do it. I mean, is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that it's not so simple who the good and bad guys are. There's a complex situation.
I want to thank all our guests, Dan Perry, Bobby McDonough and Daniel Levy. And thank you too for watching.